So I think you probably heard the cheer that when everyone heard about your wonderful gift that they're all getting a copy of Interventions. You heard the roar go around the room.
Thank you for. I hope you will read them. Thanks.
So the first question, we have about 1,300 people in the room from 183 different countries.
That's fantastic.
What do you think are the advantages of having so many countries present in one room or one organization, and what are the challenges of that?
I think first of all, it's wonderful that you're all together from these different countries. And I think in the last 3 days, you have been able to assess for yourself the possibility of cooperating across borders, that you can work with people from different cultures, with different languages on a common objective. But it also has complications. It's not always easy. But what is important is that we accept that in today's world, we have no choice. We have to learn to live together. We have to learn to work together. And you, as leaders of the 21st century, are beginning at the right time. In a way, it's very interesting for me. I started the way you brought the young ones here to start. I had gone to a conference like this, something similar, in West Africa, in Sierra Leone. I was the vice president of the Ghana Students Association. And unbeknown to me, there was a scout looking around for students from newly independent countries to go and study in the States and then help their countries. And I was scouted, and I went to school at McAllister College in Minnesota. And that's how I began. Very much like you. And so probably we have a future Secretary General sitting in this room. And I'm sure she will. And I'm sure she will remember this event when she becomes Secretary General.
How do you see the role and importance of the UN in future years, and how should or could it renew itself?
That's a very good question. I think the UN needs to reform itself. It's an organization that was created after the Second World War in 1945. We live in a world which has changed considerably, and the UN has to adapt. Today, people believe the power base of the UN is too narrow, based on the 5 permanent members. And as Secretary General, I pushed very hard to get it reformed so that we can create additional permanent seats and bring in, for example, Latin America, the whole Latin. You can applaud. Latin America doesn't have a single permanent seat. Africa, with 54 countries, doesn't have a single permanent seat. A country like India, with a fifth of the world's population. And so, and on top of that, today we are seeing emerging powerful countries, from Brazil to Indonesia to South Africa, and they are going to demand a place. They're going to demand a place at the table. And I think if we can reform the UN and broaden that base, we will make it more democratic and more representative, and it will gain in greater legitimacy.
I think you know that you've had a pretty enormous influence on me, and you're one of my personal heroes.
Yeah.
Who are your heroes and why?
That's, I think Mandela comes to mind because of his personality and what he did. Somebody who spent 27 years in jail and came out without bitterness. His humanity hadn't diminished. He was capable of making peace and reaching out, and made a difference. But of course, he was also lucky to have another partner, de Klerk. I think those two men made a difference. Without de Klerk and Mandela, I don't think the transformation we saw in South Africa would have been as smooth and as peaceful as it did. The other leader I would like to mention, maybe most of you wouldn't remember him, was Helmut Kohl of Germany, and the role Kohl played in bringing the two Germans together, taking political risks, giving up the Deutschmark, which for Germans was quite something, but he played an important and a key role in bringing these the two sides of Germany together, and of course, it also helped strengthen the peaceful development of Europe. I mean, when you consider that Europe went through two brutal wars the last century, and today, when you look, of course, there are problems with the Eurozone, but today, war in Europe, for me, is unthinkable. Yeah. And it's due to leaders like him and others. Yeah. Good.
Now, in your memoir, you say that the Millennium Development Goals and R2P are attempts to renew the structures of global governance. How do you see the future of global governance? Do you think new institutions will be created for this redefined world?
Yeah, I think first of all, the Millennium Development Goals provided the first global framework for development and to lift people out of poverty. So it was that important. Everybody signed on, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and the average man and woman in the street, whether in Johannesburg or Delhi or Bogota, understood it. And they also put pressure on their governments to deliver. And since the goals were established, millions have been lifted out of poverty, particularly in places like Brazil, India, China, and others. Not all countries will meet the goals, but at least they have an objective that we are working towards, and in effect, going back to the issue of putting the individual at the center of what we do. There had been a tendency in the past to focus on military might of countries, military might of government, spending lots of money on military. We are now telling them, focus on the well-being of the people and look after them. The R2P, responsibility to protect, also moves towards the same direction. In effect, telling leaders that you do have responsibilities towards your population. It is your responsibility to protect them. And if you do not, others outside your country would intervene. And this is a completely new concept in a world which is built on states, and states believe sovereignty is invaluable and nobody can touch their sovereignty. To manage to get them to accept that if a government misbehaves, people outside can intervene. And as I said, not necessarily with military might. And these are new concepts which 10 years ago, 15 years ago would have been unthinkable. And I think this is also due to the fact that today civil societies and people-to-people contacts have become very much part of international diplomacy and international relations. Corporate leaders, NGOs, writers all play a role in international diplomacy. What we are seeing here is very much part of that effort.
And I'll do two final questions before we open to the mics, but what do you consider the hardest lesson or lessons of your career to date?
I think the most difficult and the most painful one is when you deal with situations where people are at risk and war is pending, and lots of people are likely to get killed. And you do whatever you can, you lobby, you're on the phone, you talk to leaders, you talk to the press to try to do whatever you can, working with others to protect the people, and it doesn't work. Iraq was one such example, and it was almost like a body blow, because I was really against that war with every fiber in my body, and it didn't work. Another one. It was really disappointing, and then on top of that, at the end of the war, when we were asked to help the Iraqi people restore their sovereignty and rebuild their institutions, I sent some of the best UN officers and good friends of mine, including Sergio de Mello, Nadia Yunus, and Sergio was such a brilliant diplomat that I saw him as a Secretary General one day. They were all killed in one big blast, and that really shakes you, and nobody would ever know how pained it was, the melancholy, the disappointment, except perhaps my wife who saw it every day. And of course, we now also have the Syrian effort, which I got involved to try to help and solve peacefully. But the protagonists are determined to fight it out. Supporters are determined to give them weapons to kill each other. I'm convinced that there is no military solution and that any militarization makes the problem worse, and that what is required is a political settlement that would ensure change in Syria, with President Assad moving on, with a transition government that has full executive authority, with a structure that ensures the interest of all are protected. And when I say interest of all, there are many groups in Syria. We often hear about the Shia and the Sunni, but besides them, you have the Christians, you have the Druze, you have the Kurds, you have the Turkmen, you have the Assyrians, and you have the Ismailia. They are caught in the middle. These are groups that are not necessarily with the government nor with the opposition and are worried about what happens to them. We need to reassure all these people that there's space for them in future Syria. We need to assure the fighting groups that there is an alternative, that if you stop fighting, there will be a political dispensation that would ensure that your interests are protected. So lay down your guns, and hoping that the Security Council will get united. They are divided at the moment, that the governments in the region working with the Security Council can pressure these warring factions to pull back and make the sort of peace that I'm referring to. Whether they like it or not, whether they fight for 1 year, for 5 years, for 15 years, they will still have to come back to the political settlement. The only difference is that thousands more people would have been killed in the meantime. So that's painful. Yeah.
So I love the title of the last chapter in your book, which was Dreams with Realism. I think that could almost be a fantastic anthem for this group. But let's go to the floor and get some questions. The only bit that's not realistic is we're not going to get through all of those questions, but the faster you guys ask the questions, the more wisdom we will hear. So quickly say who you are and where you're from, and then we'll ask the question.
Sure, thank you. I'm Philip from Australia, but I'm now studying in the UK. Mr. Secretary General and Honourable Chair, because I'm actually the chairman of a Model United Nations Society at Imperial College in London. If ever you come by, please come and give us a talk.
Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you. My question is, groups such as One Young World and Model UN are one of the ways to bring people, not only to bring their new ideas, but also to understand the sort of structure in which the world now works and how it is actions can come through. My question to you is a really simple one. How do we get more people involved in things like Model UN and One Young World, even the people who don't necessarily have the means to, say, attend a conference?
Yeah, no, I think it's important. First of all, it doesn't have to be a big operation. We can start, as I said, in our own community, in our schools, and I'm sure when David and his team started this some years ago, they wanted to bring young people together to work together. And you are doing it in London. Each school can start it. And I got a letter from a young Chinese student when I spoke in Washington 2 days ago. He reminded me that when we met in Beijing and talking about leadership, I asked each of them to tell me what they do in their summer or in their free time. One said, I help teach illiterate children. Another one said, I volunteer for this and that. Or with 3 of my friends, we do, and each of them, in their own little way, were already showing leadership. Yeah. I said, that's how it begins. You are leaders already. So he wrote me a letter, said that had an impact on me. I'm now studying at Johns Hopkins, and I want to continue volunteering and doing what I do. And so it can start small and in your own community and in your schools.
So Kate and I keep telling you to do things. Now Kofi Annan has told you to do things. You have to. Kate, over to your microphone.
And this is Simon from Germany.
Hi there. Dear Mr. Secretary General, I'm from Germany. I'm also one of the older ones of these youngsters here, so I actually do remember the Berlin Wall still being erect. I do remember the German reunification, and my sister is today married. I'm from the former western part. My sister is today married to a gentleman from the eastern part, so German reunification has really brought something together. I'm married to a girl from Spain, so European integration is also working. So thanks for thank you for bringing that up. My question: you already mentioned the disappointment that you had to deal with Syria, or also before with Iraq. And as future leaders, we will most likely also face certain disappointments and setbacks. So what is your suggestion for us how to deal with that in the future?
Yeah. No, disappointments you will face. You will also have some successes. The main thing is that you should be prepared for disappointment. Not every day is Christmas. You will have some good moments, you will have some successes. Even if it's one person you help, it's important. But you must learn from your failures. You must learn from the disappointments. And in fact, if you handle it well, it makes you stronger and you move on. That is what we call experience. But there are two types of experience. Make sure you avoid the first one. Experience can be repetitive. People do the same thing over and over and they say they have experience. It has to be the type of experience where you draw the lessons, where you learn. It strengthens you, it broadens you. You develop self-insight and awareness and have an instinctively can tell where to turn, what is right, what is wrong, and you build on it. And in that sense, the failures, the disappointments, enriches.
Go to the microphone at the back, please.
Hi, my name is John, and I'm from Pittsburgh. Mr. Secretary General, it's an honor to have you here in my hometown. My question is about Syria. Can Lakhdar Brahimi succeed in bringing the sides together for peace in Syria? And if so, what is different in his approach than your approach?
You mean the new one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know him well. He is a friend. He's a good negotiator and a good mediator. And with these things, it's not static. You sometimes have a break. Suddenly the people supporting the factions may themselves conclude that if they continue on that path, they are going to lose everything. Because all the countries involved have a common interest. What is required is maturity for them to come together, bridge their differences, and work towards those common interests. Sometimes it could happen. Or you may have incredible development in the battlefield. But that, even then, in the Syrian case, will only be the beginning, because you need to have the sort of political settlement I'm referring to. So he may be lucky and get a break, but he is serious, and I'm happy he took it on. I was happy to take it on, and I think it was also right that I stepped down. And I hope my resignation itself was a contribution to the peace process, telling the people, you're handling it wrong, your divisions are making matters worse and killing Syrians. Divisions are normal in any human endeavor. What is important is to have the leadership to bridge the differences and move forward. And we haven't done that in the Syrian case yet.
Thank you.
Kate.
Eski from Turkey.
Hey everyone, I'm coming from Turkey, southeast of Turkey, a small town where the Syrian bombs landed 2 weeks ago. And I just want to ask you, I'm not defender of Turkish international policy about Syria, neither the Assad regime or the people who are fighting against Assad regime. I just want to ask you why the UN is not taking precautions to stop this fire. Because if this fire goes on, it can affect Turkey, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran. Everybody, every single country knows it. And why the UN is not taking faster and quicker precautions to prevent it. Thank you.
It's a good question. And this is one of the reasons why I took on that job in Syria. Because it is obvious to me and to many that if we do not contain the fighting in Syria, the sectarian war will spread, it would inflame the region. I have said time and time again that Syria is not Libya. It will not implode. Syria will explode and explode beyond its borders if we don't handle it well. And already, as you've said, Turkey is involved. Lebanon is engaged. Jordan has hundreds, thousands of refugees. We have Iraq on the other border with the jihadists crossing in and out. And so already the fear you've expressed is beginning to happen. When you talk of the UN, I hope you are talking also of the member states, because it starts with the divisions in the Security Council. I have pushed very hard to try and get the permanent members to work together. Today you have Russia and China on one side, and the other three permanent members on the other side, US, France, and UK. As long as they are divided, they are weak. They cannot put sustained and collective pressure on the region and on the parties to stop the killing. And this is where I think we should get them to come together, and something that I've been working on for some time and still making phone calls about, even though I'm still not involved. But the Turkish government has exercised restraint, and I hope it will continue to exercise restraint and not take initiatives or action that will compound the fighting in the region.
So what we'll do very quickly, because we have about 4 minutes left, is just each one of the three of you ask your question, and then Mr. Annan can put an answer across the three together. So very quickly, who you are and your question.
Mr. Annan, thanks for your generosity for the book. Just for your information, there are 184 countries in this room, not 183. Just because the UN does not recognize it, it doesn't mean that Kurdistan does not exist. So I'm Karov from Kurdistan.
You've declared independence.
Excuse me? That's it. And there is the flag. So the question is, like you just have written a book about intervention. While intervening in a state, the UN or the international community, what's the priority for them? Is it human rights or it's the political balance of power in that area?
Okay.
Clear. Okay, next question very quickly, the back microphone.
Good day, Secretary General. I'm Nomatrebi Chakwaja from South Africa. I'm also an MUN member at the University of Cape Town. The question I'd like to pose to you today is, do you think there's more room to increase the scope of the United Nations in terms of protecting NGOs in military regimes and any other stakeholders that oppose the current government in those countries, rather than waiting for atrocities to happen and then only often coming in with a narrow mandate?
And then finally,
very pleased actually to ask this question, because this is a question after my graduation, my first MUN competition. Right, Mr. Annan, well, you have said your disappointments towards United Nations, but what's the biggest failure of United Nations during your leadership? And hypothetically, if you could use Doctor Who's time machine, what would you do to kind of rewind, and what would you have done, kind of thing? Thank you.
maybe a wrap-up answer to all three.
Yeah. No, I think the question about protecting civil society and NGOs, I think goes back to the basic question of development of rule of law. Because if you do have rule of law, and we encourage these civil societies to be active, and what is also happening, which is of great interest, is they are linking up globally. You have robust international civil society developing, and they often stand by each other and support each other. And I think that is very, very important. On the question of if I had Dr. Who's machine, which I don't have, which I don't have, let me say that there are lots of things the UN can do, and you can be part of that. You, as individuals and as groups, can be part of that. In the sense, let's take an issue like the environment and the climate change. In each of your communities or your universities and others, you can organize yourself to raise the temperature on the environment, to put pressure on the politicians and move it higher up the political agenda and get them to understand that it is your future, it is a world you are going to inherit, and the environment is important to you, and you want your leaders to deal with it. You would even be more effective if not only do you organize to push it up the agenda, but you vote, you register and you vote. And you are not apathetic at the time of elections. Yeah. And I have often said that where leaders fail to lead, the people can make them follow. And with real pressure, they will follow you. We had a very good example in India recently. I don't know, my Indian friends here may disagree. On the question of corruption, the government had been debating it for years and wanted to pass a law. They wouldn't do it. They couldn't do it in parliament until one man, Annan went on a hunger strike, and thousands followed him in the center of Delhi. The parliament had the courage to pass a law. And another message I will leave you with, which comes from my good friend, Professor Amartya Sen, who as a young person at the age of 9 went through famine. There was nothing to eat. And now he's a Nobel laureate, Nobel economist, Nobel laureate. He said, people in democracy do not starve. And you know why? You can starve them once, you're out of power forever. And it shows the power. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. That was absolutely fantastic. Let's give a huge round of applause. Thank you so much. That was fabulous.
Are you continuing or this is...
Yes, if you want to come this way.
All right, thanks.